Today on In Her Words, I am discussing the Hulu series We Were the Lucky Ones with writer Georgia Hunter and executive producer and showrunner Erica Lipez. The series is based on Georgia's novel of the same name and is a true story of her family's history. These two women are smart and funny, and the series is so good. We all want them working on more projects together. We hope you enjoy this episode as much as we did. Thank you guys both for being here with us today. I really want to start out, Georgia, with you on We Were the Lucky Ones, and let's start kind of with the book and how this came about. And we've seen your story of hearing your kind of starting to hear your family story and digging in a little bit. Um, Before you, I think you were 15 when you started hearing these stories and started researching. Did you know your family was interesting or unique or anything before that? Because I'm 50 and I still think my family's boring. So when did you really know that? And was there interest even before you started hearing these stories to dig into your family?
Sure, that's such a good question. Well, thank you, first of all, so much for having us. We're very excited to be here and it's an honor to be with you. But yeah, I get asked the question a lot, and I do think back, it's been a minute since I was 15, but I absolutely knew. I would say quirky is a word that comes to mind when I would describe my family and my grandfather, especially. Not so much my grandmother. She was a bit traditional and Southern and quiet, very quiet. Like he
Mhm.
was definitely the louder, more charismatic of the two. Um, and little by little, I'd learn things about him, like how he would, he made a lot of the things in his home by hand. Like he had a loom that he built from scratch that he kept in the basement. On that loom, he wove the curtains that hung in the living room. He had this weird little contraption that he made. He thought like soap dishes were gross, like slimy soap, that
Uh-huh.
sits in a
Right,
dish.
right.
He's a kind of a neat freak. And so he would like embed magnets into his soap and then hang like over the sink, somehow hang the opposing magnet. So the soap would like dangle on a magnet
Right.
over the sink. So there were lots of little things. He had these clay busts of his children that he made from, by hand that were, off of a picture that his brother Jacob took. Lots of art from all over the world that he collected, always
Mhm.
music playing. And so like looking back, I see it. At the time though, I am an only child. He was my
Okay.
only living grandfather. And
Okay.
so it's all I knew. Uh,
Right, right.
and to this day, like Erica's met the family now.
Mhm.
All you know is your family, and my family is very eccentric and quirky and different in a lot of ways. And so I think that was just my normal. So I never really questioned it. But yes, looking back, now I see signs of his resourcefulness, his
Right,
Europeanness,
right.
stickler for manners, spoke a lot of languages. So it is interesting. That's the funny age, right? 15, when you're starting to kind of come into yourself and figure out who you are.
Right, right.
He sadly had Parkinson's. So he was there, he was with it mentally, but had trouble speaking even like when I
Mhm,
was like
mhm,
13. So
mhm.
yeah, I wish I'd had a chance to ask him many, many, many
More
more
questions. Well,
questions.
it sounds like he was artistic as well as building furniture and being resourceful. Do you feel like that's where you got your writing and your artistic side of things was through him in his way?
Perhaps some of it from him, but I have to give my father some credit for that too. He was a writer and
Mhm,
actually also in film, and wrote his first book when I was maybe 3 or 4. So some of my earliest memories are
mhm,
of him like
mhm,
banging away at his typewriter in the little
mhm.
house where I grew up, and then a year later holding that book in my hands, which like now I know the process of writing a book and how impossible it is. But as a little kid to have that experience and say, "Oh, my dad wrote a book, and here it is. Like you can do
Right.
this." And my mom's actually a beautiful writer as well. So I
Okay.
grew up in a house, I think, with a lot of creativity, and certainly my grandfather had that like, there's nothing we can't tackle
Right,
mentality,
right.
probably subliminally played a role in me just taking
Mhm.
on the project.
Well, did you write
And
before that? Were you writing before you decided to take on this family project in your teens?
personally for
Okay.
fun in journals, and I also
Uh-huh.
did work as a copywriter in the marketing world. So writing copy for,
Okay.
specifically, I targeted adventure travel companies. So I would write their marketing brochures or their websites or a blog entry, which is really fun, but obviously a big departure from writing a novel about your
Right, right.
family.
And Erica, what about you? How when growing up did you come from a creative family? Did you have a camera? Were you writing? Were you directing people around with in your family?
There were definitely pockets in my
Uh,
family of creatives. I think there's a lot of writing in my family. Sometimes that comes from a more academic place of writing, but a lot of, I think a lot of love for the arts, a lot of musicians on both sides. And so the arts were a big part of my life growing up. And I was a passionate TV watcher as a
mhm.
young kid, which I think which was a little bit new within the family. I mean, I grew up in Maine, so it's not like nobody was in the industry, and so it wasn't like
Okay.
I think TV writing is a much more visible profession these days. But I think
Mhm.
growing up, I didn't really know that you could like make a career of it. But I knew I loved TV shows, and I was always like thinking about the TV shows I loved and like coming up with storylines in my head, like fantasizing about like, oh, if this was my TV show, this is what I would have the characters do. And I was a lot of living in my head in that way. And I started writing plays. And I think as I got older and I realized that you could have a job writing television, I was like, oh yes, please
That's the
sign me
one
up
for
for
me.
that. That's the dream.
Yeah. So I was looking at your past projects and everything. You guys haven't worked together before.
No.
How so tell us how that came about. How did you get put together? What was the interest? Tell us about that.
Well, the common denominator is Mr. Thomas Cale, Tommy Cale.
Yeah, the
Georgia. I
director.
mean, I'll let Georgia say her connection to him, but Tommy and I, we worked on a play together 10 years ago at Second Stage, and we loved working together. I mean, he's such an incredible director, an incredible artist and collaborator, and so we really wanted to find something to do in television together. And he called me one day and he said, I have this book and I really think you're going to like it. And he sent it to me. And at this point, I didn't know. Georgia can tell you her connection to him, but I didn't know their whole backstory. But I read her book in 24 hours. It was
Oh
just the
my
most
gosh.
incredible read of
Yeah.
all time and fell madly in love with the Kurtz family at the center of it. And I just thought, this is everything I've ever wanted to do as a writer. I like sort of as a TV writer, I knew it could be such a compelling story on the screen, and it was
Mhm.
all there in the book.
Mhm.
And I knew it would be very hard, and I didn't want anybody else to try. And so that's when I got introduced to Georgia and fell in love because Georgia is just the absolute best.
Well, everything that all your interviews and everything together, it's like they must have been friends since grade school.
I think Tommy, one of Tommy's other big gifts, I think, as a director and human, is like matchmaking, friendship matchmaking, creative matchmaking. Like he does understand people so
Yeah.
well, and I think he had a sense we would really like each other and creatively understand each other, and all of those things are very true.
He
Yeah, that
absolutely said
it
that. I
comes
can't
across.
wait for you to meet Erica. I think you're gonna love each other. And when Tommy says that, yeah. And that kind of goes back to my introduction to Tommy, because back in the way long time ago, he was a camp counselor with my husband, Robert, at a
Oh
little
my
camp in West
gosh.
Virginia. So they met when they were like 12 and 14, maybe,
Oh my gosh.
and became best friends at this little camp. And then he came into my life at 19. and became, I fell in love with him. That was like, there's no one like this person. I've never met anyone like Tommy Kail before. And he spent a lot of time with us on like our vacations with my family, and we've followed his career since day one, and he's followed my journey with the book. And I think that camp counselor sort of mentality is so fitting for him, because he's like, when you see him on a set too, you're right. He just wants people, he finds people who he thinks and knows will appreciate each other, will get along. He takes care of everybody. He's so positive and upbeat, focused when he needs to be focused. I don't know. It was really cool. And so Erica's a pro. I mean, this is my first foray into anything. So into the television world. And, but I'd never seen him actually at work before. I'd only seen his work on a stage or on the television. So it was really cool to see him in his role. But yeah, so it kind of is, this project is unique in that way, and that it's not just a personal project for me because it's my family story, but it's, when Tommy called, and let's see, it was like the end of 2017, like when the book came out in paperback, it was about a year after it was published, and said, hey pal, how would you like to bring this story to the screen with me and partner and do this? It just felt like such a dream to be able to work with him, a dear friend who's an incredible human and so talented. And then he introduced me to Erica, and it was a love story from there.
From there on out. Well, that kind of answers one of my other questions, is what I wanted to get into, the decision to make this obviously so not only is it a personal family story, but it's a very, very difficult story. It's a very difficult time in our world's history, and how personal it must have been for you to understand what your family members were going through, and to let that story, first of all, to give that story to the world is one gift, but then to put it in someone else's hands to make it into a different version, I had to be such a difficult, but it sounds like Tommy was almost family taking it for you. Did that make it easier?
100%. I honestly was nervous for it to fall into the wrong hands, and it had been floated, and I had the film agent working in, but when he called, it was just like, oh right, this is the home for it. If there will be one, it's in his heart, and then in Erica's heart, and then and it took us a while to get it off the ground, and when we pitched it to Hulu, it fell into their hearts, and Tommy was also incredible, despite this being my first experience in television. He said, how involved would you like to be? And Erica too, like, you guys just from the very beginning, you said you can either kind of let the pros do what they do and kind of pop in and out, or come at the beginning and come at the end and see the product, or you can be involved every single step of the way. And maybe that's my grandfather in me. I was like, every step of the way, please. And they held their word. I mean, I was every single part of it, from the pitch to the casting, to the writer's room, to the sets, to the post-production. I mean, my learning curve, I've never learned so much in such a short period of time. And it's been so incredible and such a joy. So also to know that I was welcome in that sense meant so much to me, and my voice was heard, and I did a lot of listening in the beginning, and then I kind of got the courage to pipe up, and it really was an incredible experience. I felt so close to it and so involved every step of the way.
Yeah, and Georgia, I want to get to the cast in a second, but they were so amazing. Go ahead, Erica. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say Georgia's modest, but I think reading the book, you don't do a story like this unless you really want to be faithful to the book. So it's sort of when I knew that Georgia would be involved, I was honestly just deeply relieved, because I think I knew we could bring a real authenticity to that. Also, like, Georgia did 10 years of research, and it's sort of, like, opening up the book to a series meant sort of diving deep back into that research. She was such a deep well of knowledge. When a question came up in the room, sort of, she'd be able to ask family members, go back to the drive, but I also, when I read Georgia's book, I was like, this person is also a closet TV writer. Like, there is, because you read a lot of books in business to adapt. And I did think, oh my gosh, this, in addition to the characters and the scope of the series, it had this pace and propulsion to it that is really reminiscent to me of television. Like, I sort of feel like I read Georgia's book the way you might binge a TV show, just like definition of a page turner. And I just knew we would be faithful and that she would really help us find the direction on that. And
Mhm.
it was a real gift every step of the way to have her by my side.
So when Tommy got involved and brought the team together, did you know? Did you was Hulu involved then? Did you know it was going to be a series? Because I was wondering, Georgia, did you, or well, either Erica, were you guys looking at it like, please don't make this a 2 hour movie. Please don't force us to. So did you already know that you were going to have the space in a series to really tell the story the way that it was written? How when did kind of the Hulu-ness or the series of it come in?
When Tommy approached me, it was always about making it a series, a
Okay.
limited series. And I mean, and that is where my sort of passion and
Hmm.
background lies
Hmm.
anyway. So the intent was always to make it a series. And I think what we realized is we are in such a great era of the limited
Yes.
series,
Yes.
and that, you know, in a past era, this is a book that would probably have been slotted to be adapted to a movie, and that would have been, I think,
Horrible.
terrible for a book
Yes.
like this, because the gift of it is the scope and scale and
Hmm.
how profound each storyline is. And I can't even imagine the choices we would have had to have made to sort of confine the book to a movie. It just was so perfectly set up for, you know, I think there was always the question, is it 6 episodes, is it seven
Yeah.
episodes, is it 8 episodes, is it 10 episodes? And I think by just naturally developing the pitch as a
Hmm.
team, we sort of figured out that 8 episodes was the perfect
Yeah.
landing point for adapting the book.
I just was able to speak with Tembi Locke, from scratch, and it's a very, I mean, they're very similar. It was her, her story and her husband and that, but she said almost the exact same thing of having that series flexibility to say, because it is a big difference to say this is 6 episodes versus 8 episodes. I mean, that's almost a whole movie sometimes that you're, adding on, but that flexibility and the fact that there's so much good, there's so many great stories and so much good content in that series world, I think is, I like I said, I mean, I'm such a book person first, and I think back to all of these stories that we had crammed into a 90-minute movie or a 2 hour movie, that in this era we would have had that, we probably would have enjoyed them more on
Yeah.
screen if we would have been able to have them as a quality series.
Well, I think what I love about television is I think it is so character focused,
Hmm.
and it is, I think, you know, I imagine if you adapted the book into a movie, it would just become about all the events of survival. And I think what
Hmm.
we always talk
Hmm.
about so much with the series is it's really about the moments in between, the moments of connections between the families, between the couples, between siblings. And a series allowed us to have that balance of the humanity and the human, just day-to-day moments of this family living,
Hmm.
and not just about the moments of survival. And so,
Hmm.
and I think that was the
Yeah.
biggest gift of finding a place like Hulu who let us do that.
Right. Right. And was Hulu involved at the beginning, or was it already going and Hulu was pitched and came
No,
on?
we took it out as a pitch,
Okay.
and it took time. I mean,
Yeah.
I think our show should be an inspiration to people who have like passion projects that are just, that sometimes it takes a minute to find its
Yep.
place. Like, I think our pitch process, Georgia, it took about 2 years to develop it
Oh
and find
wow. Okay.
where we took it out twice. Um, and I think the second time we took it out, it was a few months into the pandemic. And we always talked about how the series, because it's so much about starting with a family together on that Passover in 1938, and then they are separated, and we spend years like hoping for them to get back around the dinner table together. And I think a few months into the pandemic, it just seemed like everyone understood that feeling in a way,
Hmm.
in such a deeply visceral way,
Hmm.
that longing. And it just, Hulu signed up. They're like, we're in.
That's amazing. No, and it is the perseverance is, I hear that so often, like just you have to keep going. There's different times, there's different, for the right place at a different time can, can really, really matter.
Yeah, it really does.
I wanted to ask you about one of the things you've talked about in a couple of interviews and watching it was just how global of a story it became, and the travel that you guys did in filming and the different locations. I just finished a book this spring about, and it was focused on World War II and about in Italy, and it was talking about how culturally Italy, they don't talk about the war. It's not, and when I stopped to think, I read that, I was like, well, when you stop to think about it, us kind of in, broader culture, we hear so much about Germany. We hear so much about, different places, but we don't hear a lot. And they were like, culturally after the war, they didn't want. So I was very curious with all of the locations and where your family moved and spread out, how you found that. Was everyone very willing to talk about their experience and to bring that, or was there some like, it's in the past, we don't really want to talk about that?
I mean, I think for me, I got very lucky in that the family was so supportive and so excited that someone had finally like raised their hand to say, hey, like, I think we
Mm-hmm.
should try to tell the collective story. Cause all of the, out of the 5 siblings, there are 10 first cousins and they'd all heard stories from their parents, but no one had kind of
Put
done
it
the work
all together.
all together. So I was very great, like lucky to be met with a lot
Mm-hmm.
of support there. I think my hardest interview was with Felicia, and she was the only member of the family with firsthand memories because she was a baby at the start of the war, and
Mm-hmm.
sadly, her entire childhood was consumed with, not knowing anything but being in hiding or being hunted or being in danger. And so I was very nervous for our time together. But she was stoic about it, but so open with me. And what she was able to remember was just incredible, like the vividness of it. And I certainly and I think about some of her answers and think maybe she's just remembering something her mom passed down to her, but then she would describe in detail, and this is when she's like 2.5 years old, like being hidden in a factory when there was a German raid, when she's in the ghetto, and the like worry, like feeling the stomp of the German boots under her, and peeing her pants, like wetting herself, and like
Mm-hmm.
those are memories that are her own. And I just
Mm-hmm.
remember being, having kids halfway through, and I could never even fathom bringing my children to a work factory in a ghetto, and I don't know what my earliest memory would be, but I feel like for her, I know it was just a different time, and when you're that, experiencing the Holocaust, what she went through, I think you remember things. So no, I wasn't met with resistance. I know a lot of people. I've met a lot of authors who have run into that in trying to research, and I think there are survivors who really embrace their stories, and then some who really put them behind them. And you could even argue that my grandfather put his behind him. I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
really shared very little with my mom and her siblings. Little bits and pieces were there, but I had to do a lot of digging, and then a lot of looking into outside resources, databases. Thankfully, I had access to some Showa interviews, so that was really wonderful. Steven
Mm-hmm.
Spielberg's foundation, so I had three
Mm-hmm.
relatives speaking into a camera and telling their stories. Um, and there were like on occasion I'd be on my travels in Eastern Europe and might ask somebody a question about a camp, and I might get a little hint of denial, like, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about," or like I bump into here and there a little bit of resistance, kind of general public resistance,
Mm-hmm.
but never personally in my own research, which I think is again, very lucky in that sense. And even in this town of Rodom, Poland, where the family came from, our guide there was unbelievably knowledgeable about the Jewish history and open to it. And the town itself had, there used to be a synagogue, and he explained that in the beginning of the war, the Germans came in and they used it as like a stable for their horses for a while, and then they burned it down. But instead of building over this place where the synagogue once stood or just ignoring that history, they've kept it as a square, an open square. It's like a piazza with
Mm-hmm.
a memorial. Like it's got a memorial, like a statue that describes what had happened and a little bit about the Jewish history of the town. So that's unique too. Not all towns embrace their Jewish history
Right,
or talk
right.
about it at all. Like you're saying, Italy. I'm so curious. What book was it? I want to know.
It's called Under a Scarlet Sky.
Beneath the Scarlet Sky. It's so
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's a true. I mean, it's based on a true person and true, or a real person and true. It's kind of a historical fiction, but yeah, I was
Talk
amazed, and
about it in Italy as much at all. It's
right,
very vague and it just has kind of surfaced in like the 80s, I feel like.
right, right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was very grateful to not run into it. I mean, it was hard, the research, because it
Mhm,
was like digging and digging and digging for these
mhm,
little nuggets of information. But so much has been digitalized, and so
mhm,
like through the
mhm.
International Tracing Service, through Yad Vashem, through like the military records, because a couple of relatives ended up
Right.
in the military. The Hoover Institution at Stanford University had like a 9-page document of my great uncle Genix that he had written by hand about his whole experience in Siberia, which was a big black hole in the family's
Right.
history. They knew about Siberia, but they didn't know why he was sent, where he was, what he was doing. And this explained everything. So it was definitely, the research was definitely a mix of oral history and then this sort of outside research through.
It was like unbelievable, these personal accounts that Georgia had to share,
Mhm.
that then backed up by sort of historical records. So it's like, yeah, you do. I mean, you always think about memories. I mean, they are so personal, and there's always accuracy in them, but then there's also that subjectivity. And
Mhm.
it was incredible to see these accounts backed up by records. I mean, we've time and time again, the events that are depicted in the book and now in the series, they are true. And it was, I mean, it's a credit to Georgia's 10 years of research.
Right, right. And yeah,
It's
that's no, that's amazing. So as you were, so you were doing all of, doing the research and writing your book, and there, and then then you're bringing it all up again as it's coming to life in front of you. And I know, you guys have talked about the cast being, all Jewish. And did it start out that way, or did you know that because you can, you can always go an easier route, you can always take the short, but how important was that, and where did that come up in the conversation, like, no, we need to do this? And you ended up with, I mean, your cast is just, I mean, Joey King is just, oh,
she's incredible.
yeah, they're
Love her
so great.
cast.
How,
They're
when did that, that authenticity, or wanting that authentic thread to keep going through, when did that come into play?
It's so interesting because we haven't had the chance to talk about this a bunch in our cast, and I know it's really meaningful to people that our cast is Jewish. And I think the thing that I haven't had the chance to say, it wasn't hard to do. Like, it was, we found an incredible group of Jewish actors.
uh, uh,
And I think what we felt was an imperative for the series was to make a family. And I think
mm-hmm,
Jewishness felt like a part of that for sure. But
mm-hmm,
I think what was also very cool within that is there are a lot of ways to be Jewish. And I think sort of even having a diversity of Jewish experiences within our cast was also very cool.
mm-hmm.
Um, but I think we always said, we want to feel like we're finding both incredible talents on the screen, but incredible humans off screen.
Mm-hmm.
Because we knew this would be a really hard show to make, and we had to create this family and this ensemble that would take care of each other and support each other.
Mm-hmm.
And also, we just wanted to make sure that everyone who was there felt a deep need to be there. And I think that just very naturally lended itself to this group
Right,
of
right.
Jewish performers. And it was like one of the most magical experiences being on set, and particularly when we were recreating any form of like Jewish ritual,
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
Passover or Rosh Hashanah or the Jewish wedding that Yaakov and Bella have. There was something about being in that space together, as people who were practicing Jews or had Jewish ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
It did just feel authentic, and it felt like such a unique opportunity. And so I'm really happy we were able to do that for this project.
No, it sounds like it almost sounds like it couldn't be any other way. Like you said, that
Yeah.
history and the obviously the Jewish community and the Jewish community is Hollywood. I mean, Hollywood wouldn't be, or the entertainment industry wouldn't be what it is without. I don't know if you guys had a chance to. Are you both in LA?
I'm in LA.
Yeah,
I mean,
in
yeah,
the Skirball Center, where we do a ton of work with the Skirball Cultural Center. But a few years ago, they had the most fantastic, Jewish support, Jewish creation of Hollywood exhibit. And
yeah.
it went so above and beyond that, Steven Spielberg is Jewish, kind of that, but like the history and the backstories and all that. I loved it. It was just such an amazing historical. I don't know if they keep their exhibits online. I don't know if you can go back and look at other things, but it was talk about learning. I mean, I felt like I was there for hours and hours and hours and just learning more than I ever thought that I could know.
I think
Um,
storytelling's like is storytelling, like sort of entertaining humor is so
mhm.
part of, I think, the Jewish tradition and the Jewish experience that I mean that sort of was like how I felt with everyone, particularly our cast. It's just like there and our we had writers who were Jewish and people involved in our crew who were
Mhm.
Jewish. It's and also amazing people who weren't Jewish involved in this project
Right,
too.
right.
I mean, I think it was wonderful to have a diversity of perspectives,
Mhm.
but there is something it's I think there's an irreverence to getting a bunch of Jews together that is helpful when also
Right.
making a project like this. I think spirits were high because I
Mhm.
think we all felt
'Cause they
so
want the story told. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um
I
I'm
also
laughing. Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, go ahead, Georgia.
Just a quick aside, I'm laughing about the storytelling aspect because we had a lot of members come to Washington D.C. for a really special event, and Erica came to dinner with them, and they were all telling her stories about the family, and she's like, "I know, I read the book and I made the show. I wrote the show." Like, we all wanted to tell her the stories of what happened to everybody.
I felt so like I felt so good though meeting I mean their her Georgia's family is incredible and getting to meet them all in person in DC. They are the most hilarious group of people I have ever met. They really are. I like that spirit of them, I think is what we tried to do with the show. And I was like, okay, phew. They
We
like
got
to
it.
make
We
jokes
got
with each other. They like to rag on each other. They
it.
like there's, there were a
Georgia,
lot of
was everyone in your family supportive of this story being told publicly?
Absolutely,
Oh,
yeah.
good. Yeah.
They're very excited about it, and it was wild to be with them at the screening. I've just kind of gotten used to seeing it through my mother's eyes because
Uh-huh.
Addie, my grandfather, it's her father, so who
Mhm.
Logan plays, and she would come to the set, and when I was on set, everyone would be like, "This must be so surreal," and it was absolutely. And then I kind of would get lost in the story or kind of get used to it in a way. Never really used to it, but it was, I'd get past it. I would get so immersed in the beauty
Mhm.
of the shoot itself. But then my mom would come and it would just all, I just was just like crying the entire time. And then being with the whole family for episode one. And then a lot of them stayed back and they came to my house here in Connecticut and we watched like Jose was there for episode three where he's born in the Siberian
Right.
and it's like watching it with him in the room and his children and his brother and his daughter was just
I'm getting chills
yeah
here.
it was we were all crying is crazy. I mean happy tears, it's a
Yeah.
beautiful, it's a
Yeah.
harrowing scene but it's a beautiful scene
Beautiful to see it.
and you come into the world, it just was wild.
Well, and just what the time was and what the circumstances were, and he's sitting there in the room with you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where the chills come from, that he survived and that he's there. You've mentioned in watching it that you were very careful about the story being really accessible to not necessarily children, but that the family could watch it together. Was that something that evolved, or was that something that from the very beginning you guys wanted to make sure that this wasn't R-rated, no kid? How did that come about?
I don't think we sort of made anything, I guess, sanitized anything to make it. I
Mhm.
mean, it's a very honest telling of
Mhm.
what happens. I mean, I think I'll just say myself, like growing up, I was, when I sort of learned about, just being in Hebrew school and learning some of this history, I really sought out stories about that time, like
Mhm.
TV series, movies, books. And I think there is actually just a curiosity that comes when you learn about an event like the Holocaust. I think, particularly like middle school, I think is a totally appropriate and I think necessary age to start engaging with that. And I think one of the best ways into that to really understand it can be through sort of a quote unquote like fictional telling, like a historically accurate
Mhm.
fictional telling can really help you understand it. And so I don't think we actively set about to do it, but I think we just had a sense, because the show is about this family and it's so much about the intimacy of this family and the love of this family, that it could be something that younger people could really find a way into, which what
Mhm.
can feel like a really daunting period of history.
Mhm.
That might be a way in, and it's the way I felt when I read Georgia's book.
Mhm.
And I will say, like, I am hearing from people that there are kids that are really interested, and it is so gratifying. I mean, that would mean everything to me if there were younger people who felt
Yeah.
like this was their window into this.
Well, and especially with Logan and Joey, in I mean, they're so popular, and they've been in the huge, young adult, or even younger when they were teens, tweens, and below. They've just, I mean, people have grown. This generation's grown up with them, and so I can imagine, and they look so young in the movie. I love that they look younger, or not in the series, not the movie. But I would think that it would be a great entry too, is that it's approachable because of the stars, and then when they get in, they see that the story is very approachable for them.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
look so relatable. They're so relatable, right? Like the
Right.
way they play off of each other and the
Mhm.
way that they interact. And like you said, it's in between the survival pieces is where all the magic happens. And they're just, everyone
Yeah.
says, oh my gosh, they feel like such a normal family. I can totally relate.
I think
Yeah.
that was actually part of the goal in casting, was to sort of find a group of people that felt just really current. I mean, I think it's so easy to make a period piece feel sort of put at a distance. Like we always sort of describe you can kind of make them feel sepia toned, and
Yeah.
like you're sort of looking at something and from a distance. And I think we knew if we found the right cast that just feels modern, I guess, in some ways, which isn't, it's not like they were trying to be modern. I mean, it's like, people in that time period, they lived in color, they lived their
Mhm.
lives with their lives. And I think they just brought that vibrancy to their performances. And I do think, I do think and hope that there are younger people who really find an access point through that. That would be so great.
Yeah,
Amazing.
no, but that's funny, interesting what you just said, because when I was watching, there was something just very different about the look and about it, and I think kind of I didn't really put my finger on it, but it looks, even the visual quality of the series looks different than what you normally see for World War II, or for Holocaust, or for
Yeah.
stories like that. But that's very true. There's a very different look to it.
Tommy is such a, I mean, he's such an extraordinary director, and he
Mhm.
has worked a lot with this incredible director of photography, Tim Ives. And like Tim has done so much brilliant work. One of the big things he did was Girls. And like there's an intimacy to the way
Mhm.
Tim created the look of the show, that, I mean, and a richness of color, and that it does feel so alive to me. I felt like I was just watching everything Tim did. Like, how are you doing this? It was one of the coolest things to watch him work on set,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
create that kind of color palette for the show.
No, it does. It does look very different. Well, I can't believe we're almost out of time. This has gone. This has been such a great conversation. I love it. But I want to ask. So now that your baby's out there and we're all enjoying it, and it's a fully bloomed out there. What are you both still working on new projects? What are you doing for downtime? I love to hear. Or I know, do you have downtime? Here, there's kids. There's all this. But tell us what do you do to kind of escape a little bit before you get into a next project, or are you watching? Are you binging? I mean, is everyone upset about the Golden Bachelor getting divorced? Oh my God. What is
I
happening?
I'm so sorry. We should not get derailed by the Golden Bachelor. I cannot stop thinking about it. It's all I've been
Were we
reading.
duped? Were we all just duped? I mean,
Feel
come on.
very duped. I will say, as an antidote to, I mean, this has been the most beautiful experience, creative experience, like human experience of my whole life, but it's also obviously an intense project to work on. So I did consume a lot of reality television to try to like balance it out. So, but I mean, I think Georgia and I have talked a lot about this. Like, I think we just finished the show last week, like final sort of visual effects for the finale. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty wild to have it going out.
Well, it's out.
Yeah, and that's part of the beauty of television too. It's like you work at a pace and it gets out there. But I mean, I feel so altered by getting to, work with Georgia and adapt this beautiful story. I mean, this will probably be the best experience of my life. So there's like a bit of a figuring out how to celebrate it and mourn it. I think Georgia and I are, we talk about just hopping on Zooms together to talk about our next projects, just because I just feel like I found a creative partner.
I want to be able to, I want you guys back on talking about your next project together. And Georgia, your next book, is it now? Is your book finished, or it's supposed to come out in the next winter, right?
Yeah, actually, hopefully early next year. It's actually set in Italy, so World War II, Holocaust-era Italy, and I have been trying to. I've been working on that in parallel with this project. It's just been challenging at times, but it's hard to let go of this one. Like Erica said, like it's like a coming down sort of feeling right now. I remember Tommy described our last day on set was like, we've been to the moon with this group of people, and it's an intense, extremely intense experience that you can only understand if you've been there. And we're coming back down to earth, like floating slowly back down, and we're going to have to readjust and kind of get back to our lives. And he's like, but we'll always have the moon. So I think
I saw Joey King yesterday, and I was talking to her because also this group of people really does love each other so much. And I was like, I think we got to do something where we try to write a project for this group of actors, like once a decade, like get us all back together. Like, let's do one when we're all in our like 80s. We just have to keep
I love that. I love that
somehow.
That doesn't happen very often. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for being here. This was so great. We love the project. We love both of you and your story, and you giving this personal story to all of us. And it is just such a gift. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you so much, Gretchen. This was so great.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe and leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. To stay up to date with In Her Words, join the conversation by following Women in Entertainment on our social channels and subscribe to our weekly newsletter at womenandentertainment.com.